Hello and welcome back to Web Components Remote Conference. I'm Justin in the midst of a storm in California where the lights are flickering and hopefully my internet connection doesn't die. But beyond that, we've got a great talk for you now from Tomasz Pluskiewicz. See, I told you I was going to mess it up. He's really nice, and he's not going to give me a whole bunch of junk about this.
No.
He's going to talk about consuming a REST API in a browser so that you don't need routing. Tomasz, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Hi. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great that I can tell you why I don't like client-side routing, and why I think it's unnecessary if you're consuming a REST API or HTTP API, depending on what you want to call it. So I'm Tomasz Pluskiewicz. So pronunciation was almost spot on. I'm a C# developer by day, and I'm interested in semantic web, REST APIs, and of course, most recently, web components and Polymer. So let me first tell you why I don't like client-side routing. Well, I think that client-side routing creates brittle code on the client. It creates sort of repetition, which I'll just tell you about in a minute. And this is not a mistake, even more brittle code, but for a different reason. The first reason is that how the URLs are handled. So for any given route with parameters, you extract those parameters and then somehow put them back together to create the API URL. This causes problems, for example, when the server changes and you have to call a different API URL. Or if you have multiple URLs for a given resource. For example, if you want to serve paying customers from a different server. So this creates brittle code and requires maintenance. Also, the repetition, you may argue about that, but for any given route, this is just taken from the previous slide. This is very similar to the API, the data URL you'll be calling. So for me, they're almost the same. All you do is take the parameter and just put it somewhere else in a different base URL or in a different place in a different URL. So why all the machinery of templates and then putting it back together in a similar but different form? And the second reason why I find routing brittle is how routers, most of them at least, choose the view. So, for example, taken from the React tutorial, for a user's path, a user's route, you would render a user's component or view or template, whatever you call it. But what happens if, for example, the API returns something else, for example, a JSON error, if something went wrong, or if the resource returns something unexpected, or if the resource bind can give you different JSON, different representations, then either your client breaks, your application breaks, or you have to include even more complexity to your client code, which you have to maintain, and it's possibly brittle. And so I've been experimenting with this idea that I simply take the client's the API address and use it instead of the route. So starting with a home address on the client, when the client application gets some resource from the server, I just simply take the path and put it on the client. It could be in the form of HTML history. It could be hash history, doesn't matter. And so I created the LD Navigator custom element, LD standing for linked data, which does what I just showed you. Takes the client address, turns it into the API URL, which you then call, and based on the data that you return, it will you will have to choose to render. So this is exactly what's been happening behind the scenes, similar to the snippet here. Whenever I click a link, I get a resource on the back end, which includes, I'll just make it a little bigger, which includes a type, and the type is then used on the iron pages to select an appropriate view. So this is just an example. Of course, you won't use iron pages in the real application, but you get the idea. Whenever I click something else, I'm, of course, maintaining history. And whenever I go to a new resource, I'm choosing the appropriate slide page. And here is what I just showed you on the other slide. Even though the route says people/Bazinga, I actually rendered the slide view because I'm not choosing the view based on the route, but based on the data that the server returned. So, well, that's it. This is, of course, just an idea, and I still don't know how to handle UI where you would compose it of multiple API calls. Certainly possible. I didn't need it just yet. So I'm open to all comments, questions, but I hope you find this idea useful.
Well, thank you so much, Tomasz, for that interesting approach to it. I mean, how did you had you worked with REST APIs quite a bit before and decided, you know what, this kind of routing in terms of web components, the way to do things in the web doesn't work for me? Like, was it one of those things? Because as someone who does some things with linked data, like, I find that an interesting concept.
Well, I started from the point where creating those URIs. So the first problem, the brittleness of constructing URIs on the client, it just went south so quickly. And so this is where, if you show the code again, I didn't say it explicitly, where you have eJSON actually includes links. So the first thing, this is more about the API, not the routing itself, but your API actually has to link to the next resource. And from there, well, it seemed just a natural extension to use those URLs. It seems pointless to me. That's the repetition where you just decompose and compose URLs over again. This is a lot and you have to maintain it. So so yes, of course, it somewhat evolved from how we created APIs in past projects.
Well, thank you very much for that, Tomasz. We greatly appreciate it. And for you out there on the live stream, we're going to hop into the next session here in about 3 minutes. So we'll see you momentarily.
Thanks. Bye-bye.